Hi, you guys. I'm sure many people are or have heard stories of neighbors from hell. This one wasn't quite that. It was simply an older, elderly gentleman who was probably set in his ways, and he just didn't want to have to deal with people on a regular basis. So trust me, in my time here, I can understand it now. But at this particular time, I lived in the state of Michigan. So, as you guys know, Michigan has very harsh winters. Well, so does Chicago, Colorado, Ohio, any state that gets these harsh winter months. And during this particular time, I lived in a neighborhood where some of the houses shared a driveway. Now, you guys are probably going, what the hell does that even mean? Like, right? Because what if someone left their car right in the middle of it, then the other person wouldn't be able to get out. But in this neighborhood, they had, of course, rules and regulations for the shared driveway. So you would actually go into your drive and then you would park your car behind your own residence, your own house, and the neighbor would park theirs, behind theirs. So that way we all always had easy access and being able to get out. So that worked out really well. Well, my girls were really young during this time. So, as you can imagine, sometimes, kids are outside throwing snowballs or doing what kids do in the winter. And every once in a while, they would not play at the driveway, but like cross it. So, as they're going down the sidewalk or something. And so one day, this neighbor came knocking at the door. Bang, 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 bang. I was like, yes. He was like, and he was an older gentleman, as I said. So he was like, tell your girls not to be crossing this driveway. So I'm like, okay, because first of all, I don't want them crossing it if traffic is coming through or, with them being knelt down or something like that. And he's coming out and not able to see them because they're small. So that made sense to me. So I was, brought my girls in, told them the reasons why the driveway, just at the driveway, was not a place for them to stop or, stand or do anything like that. And one of my girls had, heard the guy and she was like, Mom, why was that man so mean to you? And I was like, he's just an old man and he's, probably doesn't, want to be bothered with anyone. I get it. So that was fine. Well, remember I said during the winter, it gets really harsh. And this guy was like really elderly and he would walk every day to go and get a meal at a local hospital. We had a hospital that was probably 3 or 4 blocks away from us. And he would walk every day to go get his meal. And you guys are probably saying, now, how do you know what he was getting? Well, because he brought the meal pack home with him. So I would see him. And, I would wave at him and he wouldn't wave back. Or sometimes he'd be like, quit waving at me, lady. I was like, his demeanor is not going to change mine. Well, when it came to a really heavy snowfall that we got one day, I got up to, shovel the snow. And because he's elderly, I shoveled his as well, because that's the thing to do. Well, and I don't just shovel uh, the snow, I also salted his. So it wouldn't make sense for me to shovel the snow and then not put the salt on there because that sidewalk would still be very slippery. And of course, you could fall and break anything on your body. So I treated his sidewalk like I treated mine. And the first time I did that, there were no issues, nothing, he didn't say anything. And I wasn't expecting him to thank me. He hadn't asked me to do it. So it was just something I was doing on my part. The second time I did it, did the same thing, cleared his driveway, his sidewalk, and then, of course, our driveway. And then he went to go get his meal and he came and knocked on my door again. Bang, 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 bang. And I opened the door and I was like, yes. He was like, did you shovel my snow? And I was like, yeah, because I had to shovel mine. So, I mean, it just made sense to shovel yours as well. Well, you don't have to do that. I can shovel my snow. And I was like, I'm sure you can, but there's no need to. I don't mind doing it. And he goes, well, don't do it again. And I'm like, don't shovel your snow again. Is it really that serious? So I was like, this guy, I'm not sure what his problem is. I'm not, going to ask for cash or anything like that. But okay. But in my mind, and maybe this wasn't the right thing, right way to think, I'm thinking to myself, if that snow gets, and snow is heavy, anyone who lives in the winter states, that as that snow sits there after it's fallen for a while, it's really hard to shovel. With the regular shovel, unless you've got a snow blower or something like that. This gentleman did not have that. So you're not going to believe what he did. The next heavy snowfall we got, he got up at 5 in the morning to shovel his own walk. So my bedroom was the one that was towards the street. The girls' bedrooms were in the back. So I heard this shoveling like 4 or 5 in the morning. And I'm like, what the hell? So I look out the window and he's as bent over as he could be. He looks like he's tired as hell. And he's trying to get this. I'm talking like him. He's trying to shovel the snow, and you got to lift it. I mean, you got to throw it somewhere. Um, but he's doing it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, no, this guy didn't. So if you guys know me, most of you probably do by now. I was like, okay, no big deal. Um, the next time we had heavy snow, I got up at 3 in the morning to shovel his snow in mine because I'm thinking two can play that game. And again, he's elderly. He looks like he may have a heart attack trying to shovel the snow by himself. And I was like, I've got to stay the course here. If it means killing him with kindness, I'll do that. But it just didn't make sense to me to have him. He already lived alone. I never saw anyone, go to his home or anything like that. And again, every day he would walk and get his meal and come back. I wasn't asking to sit down and have a fireside chat with him or anything like that. I was just wanting to be neighborly and to let him know that he has, people that are near him that are at least looking out for him. So, of course, since I did that time, the next time we got heavy snow, I had to do the same thing because I'm like, if I don't beat him to it, he'll do it. So after a few times of that, you guys guessed it, I get a knock at the door. May I speak to you, please, for a moment? And I said, sure. And he said, can you come out? He wanted me to step out on the porch. So that was fine. And then he said, what is your name? And I'm thinking, is he going to report me to the cops for being a friendly neighbor? But okay. I gave him my name. And he said, I don't know why you were shoveling my snow. I've been nothing but mean to you and your girls. And I said, that's me. I didn't consider you being mean. I just thought, you don't, particularly like to deal with people. And I said, and I get it. And I don't have a problem with that. I said, but honestly, I just hate the idea of you're getting up and trying to shovel the snow. I said, it's these harsh winters are bad for people my age. And at that time, I was just like 36 or 37. So this was 802 years ago. So he said, he gave me his name. I think his name was Henry or something like that. And he said, I just want to let you know that I thought that I could um, wear you down, but thank you. And I was like very surprised. I said, oh, you're welcome. He said, no, I mean that. He said, I don't get any visitors. My kids are grown and gone. They never call me and they never visit ever since their mother passed away. And I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And then he kind of stood there and he said, but I get it. He said, but I get it because I was gone all the time. I worked all the time and they only knew their mother to that extent. He said, but that's the way things are. The men go to work and the women tend to the children. He said, and I love all of my children, but they don't call, they don't visit, they won't do anything with me. And I was thinking, it's probably because you told them not to shovel your snow. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So fast forward, and um, a few days go by, and I noticed his mail. Our mail, we have mailboxes. I don't even know how to say it. We have mailboxes. People today are going, we all have mailboxes, but they were actually on our home. So you know how sometimes that mailbox is right there at the front door, or as you're coming up, it's on the left or right side of the door. And I noticed that his mail hadn't, gotten picked up for a few days. No big deal because a lot of stuff is junk mail. So of course you're going to see the magazines, the newspapers sticking out, and maybe he just didn't go a couple of days to get, his meal. Well, after 2 more days, the mailman, and this is a neighborhood that people know people and everything, so we knew our mail carrier and that kind of thing. He knocked on my door and he goes, Miss Brantley, have you seen, you know, Henry lately? And I said, no, actually, I haven't. And so the mailman said, well, he hasn't picked up his mail in almost a week now. He said, and we don't have an order to stop his mail, so I'm just wondering if he's okay. And I said, now that you mention it, I haven't seen him going out, to get his meals. So the mail carrier said, do you feel comfortable with calling the police and having them do a check on him? And I'm thinking, you're the mail carrier. You're the one that noticed his mail is still there. Can't you do it? And I didn't say that, but I said, is there a problem with you doing it? And he said there was some, I don't want to say rule or something, but he said the mail carriers weren't, and this is back in the day, so maybe it's not true now, but he said they weren't able to request that. But if they alerted a neighbor to request it, then we could do so. So it's no big deal. I said, okay. So I called the cops. And of course, they come to my house and they were like, well, what's going on? And I said, well, the gentleman next door, we haven't seen him in a while. He hasn't picked up his mail or anything like that. And the police officer said, okay. I said, "Well, can you knock on the door and see if everything is okay?" And they were like, "We wouldn't have a reason to do that. How do you know he hasn't left town or something?" I said, "Well, I actually, you remember we had a shared driveway, so I had actually, after the mailman had talked to me, I actually went, in the back and peeked in his garage because they had the little glass windows there, and his car was still there. So I said, "Well, his car is still here. If he were going out of town, I would think he would use his car, and maybe he wouldn't, but that's another clue." So then the officers said, "Well, how do you know his son or his kids haven't come to pick him up?" I said, I don't know any of these things. That's why I have you guys here. I'm just saying I haven't seen him. His mail is piling up. He hasn't come out. So, to make this story a bit shorter, they start peeking through his windows. And you know how you can go to the side of the house and look in, and you look in the front of the house. One of the officers saw him sitting in the chair. And so, of course, they knocked and knocked, and the guy didn't move at all. And so they broke in, and he had passed away. So that's what happened with that. So the officers came back to my place and they was like, "Do you have Vaseline?" And I was like, "I got 3 girls. Yes, I have Vaseline. I mean, I have to do their hair." And they rubbed it all up under their nose and they explained to me that that keeps the smell from being as pungent as it normally would be if they didn't have it. So that was something I learned. Life lesson learned, right? And they thanked me for, calling it out, and, they had to get the coroner to come out there and everything. But I say all of that to say that that guy had gotten to the next door neighbor, had gotten to a point where he would talk to me, he would wave at me, he talked to me about his kids that, never visited, but that's neither here nor there. And then maybe about a week or so after that, I got a knock on the door, and it was one of the man's next door's children. So it's a lady, she was probably about in her 40s. And she came and she said, "Are you the lady that called the police to come and check on my dad?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Thank you so much." She said, "Because she didn't know I knew this because we don't visit him and we were estranged and he could have been in there for much longer than he was. And she said, I just wanted you to know that we appreciate it. So that was good. So my, as you know, mantra is knowledge is in the knowing, but wisdom is in the doing. And in this particular instance, I've actually learned a lot of lessons with a lot of experiences that I have. But in this one, it didn't matter to me that the guy was a grumpy old man. And it didn't matter to me that he asked me not to shovel his snow because, again, I know how harsh our winters are. I know how heavy that snow can be. And I truly did not want him thinking he had to go out and do that. And I liked the idea that he began to warm up to me and, smile and talk to me and that kind of thing. So sometimes we just have to keep kindness over stubbornness or over rudeness and see if we can kind of break through some of the shells or walls that others have built up. Now, of course, it's up to you to determine when it's proper to do that and when it's not. But for me, because he was an elderly man, it wasn't like he was going to come and beat me up, okay? So I was okay. And that one was a experience that I'll always remember. And I was glad that the mailman had encouraged me to go ahead and call the authorities to check on him. So this is Life Lessons Learned. This is Sherry Brantley. Please share any similar experiences you may have had. Now, maybe you were the rude, contentious neighbor and someone was able to break your walls, to break through your walls, or maybe you tried to work with the neighbor and for whatever reason it just didn't work out. That's fine as well. All experiences that we've all had, we can all learn from. So as these experiences aren't just for me and the few people to watch, but for you guys to comment as well and say what worked for you and what didn't work. Okay, thanks.